Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership in Quarters podcast, the interview series, where leaders come to share their perspectives on different leadership topics. I'm Josh Selden, and today's guest is Dan Norenberg. Dan Norenberg improves leadership performance and organizational results through executive ownershift, his transformational growth process for executive teams. As a trusted advisor, consultant, and professional speaker, Dan's mission is to enable executive teams and their organizations to play at their best. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Great to have you here. So let's jump right in. I know I'm interested to hear more about it. I know the listeners are interested as well. Can you explain to us what exactly executive ownership is and how it stands apart from normal leadership development?
Fair enough. Let me start by saying I've spent 25 years, close to 30 years actually, in human development. So as a leadership coach, advisor, and primarily that started out in the talent management area, supporting organizations for first-time hires to middle managers. And over the course of the years, I was more and more drawn, actually requested to start looking into senior leadership teams and providing them some support. And maybe it's the experience that you've had when you interface with senior executive teams or strategic leadership teams. Very smart people, very committed, very ambitious, very motivated. But at least what I saw when I first was invited into that C-suite is a group of men and women, they didn't really play well as an organizational unit. There was a lot of positioning and politics and trying to represent their own agendas. So this was the birthplace of executive ownership. And what executive ownership is, it's a top-down team approach to continuous improvement for those senior leadership teams. So traditionally, leadership is seen as an individual endeavor, and it usually starts with first-time hires, project leader, first-time leader when you move from individual contributor. This is important stuff. Or strategic leader in the middle of the organization. But today, only 1 in 20 senior leadership teams has any sort of process for continuous improvement. And I'm the believer, if you don't drive continuous improvement in your senior leadership team, how can you drive it across the organization? So again, to recap, executive ownership is top-down, it's a team approach, and it's based on continually improving all the time, which then drives continuous improvement across the organization.
That's so interesting. It made me think of a couple different things. My background is in manufacturing, and we live and breathe continuous improvement, but we so very often focus on continuously improving our systems and our production lines and all this, and not necessarily ourselves and our leadership team. So it's such a mind shift, I think, as you describe that, of viewing our leadership team, whether it's our executives or our site leadership teams, as an organization that needs continuous improvement instead of focusing solely on our systems and physical equipment.
Yeah, and you've heard this metaphor before, but what we often see at the executive level, when I talk about executive level, I talk about a CEO and her team, for example, or the head of production team, global production, or supply chain, or manufacturing, or it could be quality for that matter. But what we often see is that they don't practice the oxygen mask rule. At that level, at the strategic and executive level of an organization, these men and women have a lot on their dashboard. Right. There's a lot of pressure coming left and right, and they often don't take care of themselves first before they take care of others. You get on the airplane, they say, in case of emergency, the first thing you do is take care of yourself, the oxygen mask, then you help others.
Right.
And that's not being selfish, it's not being self-centered, but if you're not improving yourself, how can you improve others? And that's why executive ownership is so very powerful, because it goes back to the senior executives and says, hey, you're firefighting, you're running circles around yourself, but you've got to do some team hygiene here before you can really go back and run the organization the way you want to.
That makes a lot of sense. And so on that topic, how, if you could, I think it's, again, a mind shift change for a lot of the listeners and even myself as I hear this, where so often we focus on the individual and improving their leadership and improving their capability. And this kind of shifts that thought process to the team mentality. What are, in your experience, some of the benefits that you've seen focusing on the leadership team as a whole, as opposed to them as individuals?
Yeah, good question. First and foremost, I came from a family of educators. So my mother was an elementary school teacher. My father was eventually high school principal, but he was a football coach in the Midwest back in Iowa and a phys ed teacher. So I've been around education my whole life. And some kids grow up in a factory, and I grew up just being around schools. And my parents both believed that education was the great equalizer. Didn't matter where you came from. So I've imprinted with learning and education and continuous improvement. And don't get me wrong, individual leadership development is really important, but it follows our classic model of the heroic leader, the heroic soloist, and generally learning and development is driven by the HR department in our organizations, which is set up on an individual basis. But the benefits of working as a team construct, if we look at any type of team sports, American football, European soccer, basketball, baseball, cricket, rugby, you name it, you don't see during the timeouts all the players run off the field and talk to their individual coach and then all run back on. And during practice, they spend a lot of time as a team construct. The most powerful benefit of learning as a leadership team is you're able to not only improve the leadership performance of the people in the team, but you're also able to drive organizational results much faster. Now, how can I say that? Because if we're doing individual leadership development, you are still, no matter what level you are, you're still an individual contributor. And no matter the organization that you work in or any other organization, if you're an individual and you have the greatest idea in the world, it's still got to pass through a leadership team. And the quality and the way that leadership team even processes good ideas from individuals is indicative of how successful they're going to be. So I believe that leadership teams are everything to the success of a business. It's not that the individual leadership development is bad. It's just that we're doing far too much of it. When only 1 out of 20 leadership teams has any kind of a system for continuous improvement, we know something's wrong there.
Dan, I love the example you gave with the sports teams because that is exactly where my mind went when you first started talking about this. I feel like it's in basketball today where they take the stars from all these different teams and they all, when the stars align, they all go on one team. And if each individual that's really worked so hard to perfect their game, they all go on this one team. And if you don't intentionally have them go figure out how to work as a team, you're going to have 5 individuals who have their own style, have their own strengths, have their own weaknesses, just running in 5 different directions instead of working as a team. And you can put as many great people on that team as you want, but you're not going to get the results you need and you're not going to win the games.
That's right. That's a good example. I just recently watched The Court of Gold. It's an old piece on Netflix, but it's a collection of the American basketball stars that went together to Paris, and global basketball is now a top game when you got Serbia and the Germans and the French and a lot of great teams there. And the Americans walked away with the gold medal, but it wasn't because any one person was trying to dominate the game. It was we before me. And the analogy that I would use, and I think that this focus on leadership as a team construct is going to be one of the biggest developments in organizational development in the next 10 years. If we go back 20, maybe 30 years ago, that's a little bit before your time, but I was getting started back then. If you had an executive coach then, you were really quiet about it. Nobody knew. Wow. It was a little bit like a confessional thing. You had a coach, but it wasn't talked about. Now it's quite acceptable to do some coaching or go to a leadership development program or be part of an MBA program. This is really something is seen as, hey, this is developing me that I can bring back to the organization. And to some degree, senior leadership teams are sometimes still under the belief that we're the top team, so we have to know everything, we have to do everything right, which is really detrimental to their growth as a team and for the business to grow as well.
With that, I'm interested to hear your experience with the different leadership teams. I guess it's more of a question on awareness. Are they aware that they need help as a team and do they seek you out? Or do you get into situations where you're brought in to fix, let's say, an individual problem or an individual leadership problem? And in doing so, you realize that this team is one of those 19 out of 20 teams that aren't practicing continuous improvement. And so now you have to bring that up to them. You have to get them on board. And then is there any pushback or are they pretty in support of the actions?
There were several questions there, so please circle back with me. Those are some really good questions, but circle back because there was a whole lot to unpack there. Yeah. Let me just start with one of the fundamental things. I work out rather quickly whether it's something that's an individual. If there's an individual in the team, we don't use a team construct to out or isolate some kind of individual issue. I just don't believe in that. I don't think that's the spirit and the integrity of leadership team development. If a CEO or a senior head of production or supply chain thinks he has a problem in his or her team with a person, then let's talk to the individual. There's no need to bring a group and wrap a lot of smoke and mirrors around that. I just really believe in being integral. Let me say this first of all, and coming back to your initial question, I'm usually called in for one of three situations. Situation number one, it's a new CEO or a new head of function, and he or she wants to get off to a very good start. I worked with the global legal head at UBS a few years ago that had come from the Allianz organization, very successful, very international guy, very good. And he was going to UBS in Switzerland, and he'd heard about me. I've written a book on leadership development called Executive Ownership. It's pretty well received. It's a how-to manual about how to turn your team around. But he said, I'd like somebody close to me, Dan, to help me as I step into this new company with new people. And so a new leader in a situation is one place where I'll come in. Second of all, I'll come in where a team has maybe been very successful for many years, like a market leader, and then they've just started to fall back in the pack and they don't really know why. So that's also a lot of work. Like we want to get back our position. And a third situation is what I call you've hit a big tsunami or you are presented with an opportunity of a lifetime. I worked with the CEO of Allianz France, Jacques Richer. He's now retired. But he was offered an opportunity to take three of the largest businesses in the Allianz Group. They have about 300 or 400 businesses, very prestigious, very successful company. And to bring these three companies together under one company, although they were quite different. And he asked me to support him in that process, which I did for close to a year. Wow. So those are the three areas that I normally am asked to come into. And then to come to your question, what kind of response do you get? Sometimes you get the response of, we're too busy to do this. And I said, that's really something, because what if everybody in your organization said they were too busy to serve a customer, or they were too busy to help a colleague, or they were too busy to go to their leadership development program? What kind of example does that set? But sometimes they also think that I'm on top of this organization, I really don't need this. But the most important part of me coming in is to have the trust and the commitment of the senior leader of that team. We don't put this out to a vote to the teams, but it's really important. The senior leader says, Dan, and it's not that I'm coming in because things are dramatically broken. It's often that we have to shift course here. I know that starts in the leadership team. I know you've worked with over 150 teams on 3 continents the last 20 years. I'd really like your expertise to help us go through that process together. And so that's a little bit of the background of how I come in there.
It's great to hear because that's exactly what I was curious about. I feel like it's a double-edged sword working with senior leadership teams and executive teams and everything. Obviously, you have the experience and the wealth of knowledge in the room there, but you also have the egos. And so I did always wonder, when you do those things, do you come in and do you get that, like you said, hey, I don't need this. I've been in the company for 25, 30 years. I've been through this leadership training. I'm good. Or do you get that support from the team, or at least, like you said, the leader of the team, the senior leader of the team, to make sure that everybody really takes that investment?
Yeah, good point. And 2 contributions on that. Just imagine, we wouldn't in 100 years imagine that Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, after that incredible season and beating a very good Kansas City team, we'd never in 100 years expect to hear the Philadelphia Eagles team stand up and say, we're world champions, we don't need any more coaching. Going to the owners of the Eagles and saying, we're the world champions, we could probably save about $7 million on the coaching staff, let's let them all go. You'll never hear that happen, because winners know that outside help, outside support, expertise coaching helps them continue to play at that level. So that's really important. And the link here of my work has to do with developing a trustful relationship and understanding with the senior leader of the team. And if we have that, that's where that decision's made. But then what we do really goes back to the team as well. And so I think 4 weeks ago, I was with a group that the senior leader said, yes, we're going to do this. This is really important. When I met the team for the first time, they didn't know me. They're very good, very experienced, as you described them. I introduced myself, and we all introduced, and they were still looking at me. They'd never had a working experience with me, and we were getting ready for a program that was a few weeks ago. And I said, I just have 3 questions for you. And I had these little cards, that I often use. I taken 3 sets of cards and I said, on this first card, and they were all sitting around the room. And I said, this is not something you have to share. You don't have to put your name on it. But what I want you to do is just on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you're the best leadership team you could possibly imagine, and 1 is you're crawling around like a injured dog, how would you rate this group as an effective leadership team? That's question 1. That's always the first question. Question 2 is when you look at yourself in the mirror, now how would you rate yourself as a leader? 10 being you've got nothing else to learn, and 1 is you're wondering why you're sitting in this chair. And then put that on a different card, no name, between 1 and 10. And the third question is, what's your degree of willingness and readiness to improve yourself as a leader? Those are 3 questions. And the results came back and then they averaged out. They said, as a leadership team, we rated ourselves as a 5.2, individual 6.2, and our readiness 8.2. Now, that's a gap. Now, if we only get the team from 5.2 to 6.2, that can translate. This is a 7 billion euro business.
Right.
This can translate into hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is why we go back to the original title of my book and the title of this format. It's executive ownership. Executive means at the top or very personal, and it means shift. So this shift is a senior leader saying, just as you said, I've been to this course, I did an MBA at Stanford, I did a PhD at MIT. What can I possibly learn? Let's go ask Jalen Hurt, what he learned. Every day he's learning something, and they continue to learn. But if you guys learn one thing in this leadership team construct that allows you to go back and drive your business better, it's going to cascade through the entire organization.
I've done activities like the ones that you described, and I love those questions because, again, I go back to it drives awareness. And I feel like a lot of these teams aren't always aware of their current situation. And it sounds like driving the awareness then aligns to the executive ownership. And I really love the first question because I've been on a leadership team that I've experienced surprise with the results of that first question. When you say, how effective is this team? And you have your senior leader. I had the senior leader of our team in that room, and everybody did the anonymous, this is where I think we are. And the person who was leading the workshop that we're in collected everything. And on a scale of 1 to 10, we were like a 4. And they're like, I thought we'd at least be an 8. And they were completely shocked. But it was always one of the, which it sounds like with you too, one of the first things we did because it sets the tone for the training. And after that, we were able to focus on what we needed to because it took all the assumptions out of the room. It took all of the, we're the best and we have this tiny little bit of improvement we need. And we're in the training for a reason. And it really drove home that thought process of, I don't think we're as good as we think we are. And we have these improvement areas we need to work on.
That's a brilliant story there. There's so much in it that's so valuable and it touches on something else. It seems so simple. It seems so logical, but it's often overlooked is that sometimes in these senior teams, you have a lot of power, you have a lot of politics, you even have competition, which there is a healthy competition because people are competing for resources and priorities don't always match up, as you see. But the reality is when this team can learn to cooperate better and be more transparent and to be more vulnerable with each other, like to say that we're a 4, if that's the cumulative score, the senior leader must have been really having a heart attack thinking, my God, I really thought I was leading a better team than this. But it could also mean that people in the team weren't necessarily being negative. They were just recognizing we could be so much better. But this concept of being vulnerable, being able to say in a leadership team, hey, guys, I'm really confused right now. I've got to go through a head count thing. I feel really uncomfortable with it. I need your help. So when you're working with me, by the time we've been through a couple sessions, those are the kind of conversations we have in a leadership team. But sadly today, many people think they've got to keep their issues quite confidential or with their own, let's say, personal coach. And that coach never sees them in action. A leadership team coach is present during strategy discussions, strategic reviews, executive meetings. And so I shadow different events, town halls, and then I can feed back in real time what I saw about the leadership team to the leadership team about things they said were important.
And you talk about things like competition and politics and all of these things that we know exist within leadership teams. How do we, or in your experience, how have you seen when you do this work to overcome those hurdles? Because as you just gave your example, the first thing I thought of was trust. If there is no trust within the leadership team, then all the work that you're going to go in and do is just going to fall flat.
Yeah.
How do you overcome the hurdles of maybe a lack of trust, which is why they don't share with the team and they share with their personal coach? How do you overcome something like that? How do you overcome the politics where everybody's thinking of their individual silo as opposed to moving forward as a team?
Great question. You should be teaching leadership somewhere, Josh. I'm telling you. Let's, first of all, two things. One of the ways that I get those topics on the table, let's call them, how do you get the unsaid said? You know what's going around, but how do you get that, the things that are unsaid said? So part of my process of working with leadership team, after we have an agreement with the CEO or the head of the business unit, then I will meet either physically or often virtually with every single member of the leadership team
Oh, wow.
in a confidential conversation, which is absolutely confidential. That's the way I've been working for 25 years. And so what I will do is just get to know them about their role. What is their role within the organization? I'm running sales and marketing. I'm also a member of the executive team. Okay. So we talk about that. We talk about how they see the team. What's working well in the team? What's working not so well in the team? How do they view the strategy? Is it aligned? Is it energizing? Is it emotionally compelling? And when they look at the senior leader, I always have permission from the senior leader. And this is also a tipping point. I always have permission from the senior leader to gather some feedback on his or her behalf. So I'll say, Susie is the CEO. What's one thing that you appreciate about Susie? And what's one thing Susie could do that would help you be more effective or to help the entire team be more effective? We talk about the leadership team meeting. So it's just a series of questions that goes anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. I don't let it go too long, but it's all confidential. It doesn't matter who said what. There's nobody's name in this document except the head leader. Yeah, because he or she's asked for some feedback. Then I take those, I don't even call them interviews, I call them conversations, and I put those in what I call a perception consolidation. So it's everybody's perception. It's not an empirical fact, it's an emotional truth. I think our leadership meetings really stink. Nobody's ever said that during an executive meeting, but they'll
Right.
say that to me in these conversations, and I'll put this in this summary. And it's usually about 7 or 8 pages long. And when we start the offsite, we start with everybody gets a copy of that. So they read that. And they see, let me say, the good, the bad, and the ugly about what everybody said about their team. But it's all intended to be part of the continuous improvement process. And so, how do I get that? How do you get trust on the table? How do you get collaboration? How do you get sharing on the table? It's already in the document.
Hmm.
And then it's, oh, it legitimizes it. And then we go into a agenda building process. So based on what we've read here, I have agendas in the background. They're done, but it's important that the team owns the agenda. So as we go forward the next 2 or 3 days, what are the key topics that we have to address to become the kind of team that you aspire to become? It's absolutely amazing the ownership that they put into it. They construct the agenda. If I think they've left something out that's maybe too sensitive, I'm saying, guys, I think this needs to be in there. I think we need to have trust in there. And then there are various mechanisms and tools you can do that. You can use a relationship mapping. You can have the 8 or 9 people in the room all be on one big board with their names and break them in 2 groups and say, now, as we look at the relationship between the different members of this executive team, draw a green line between the people that you think have a constructive, healthy working relationship, draw a black line if you're not sure, and draw a red line if you think there's some kind of disturbance. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You could be head of quality, I could be head of manufacturing. We might be arguing about some things because I'm trying to get my production out and you're trying to say, no, Dan, we've got certain quality issues here and we're at an impasse here. So there's some natural, let's say, conflicts between different functions, but I just have a variety of tools, and you can read about those in my book as well, that help make transparent, help make material those things that often lie, let's say, under the conference table.
That's really interesting to hear because it sounds like what you do is you force the trust and the psychological safety out in the open, which they don't necessarily feel comfortable doing.
I wouldn't use the word force. My background's in psychology and criminology,
Yeah.
and I don't think people should feel forced. I try to work with people in the workshops as I want to help them work together in person. They don't want to force somebody in their organization to do something they don't want to. But what I'm seeking to do is to get their permission.
Right.
When people give me the permission to address these topics, And so if you think about the classic iceberg, there's only
Mhm.
about 22% above the water, and there's 78% below the water. The stuff above the water is what I call the material reality. That's stuff like project plans, that's the strategic plan, that's compliance issues, quality, our company values that are above the line. These are things that are explicit, we can measure them. But the success of a leadership team is highly dependent on the balance in the non-materiality, trust, how is power distributed? What's the relationship between key players? Are there historical legacies? Did Johnny become the CEO and Bill really wanted it and they never talked about it? Those are things that even years later can still be holding a team back.
Right.
So I more or less put the report on there and I said, what do you guys want to do with this? And they go, we got to tackle it. So forcing wouldn't be the right word. I don't want to force people to do that, but I want to gain their trust that I know how to work with them on those sensitive issues. And what we know about issues like trust and power and conflict, when they can put it on the table, it loses its power.
Right.
So if we've had an issue and we've never really talked about it because you're working in North Carolina and I'm in Munich, but we're still part of a global team, it's not like we can't work together, but there's still something between us. But when we come together and then the facilitator, Dan, gives us a chance to go off and go on a 20-minute walk and talk about what's working well between us, what's not, more often than not, we're going to work that out. And you're going to have renewed relationships. And that's why resilient relationships is another really important part of this entire executive ownership process.
No, you're right. And force definitely wasn't the right word to use. I feel like what you enable the team to be able to do with everything that you just said is to put that elephant on the table and have the team see, I think you said it earlier, see what's not being said. And I think it really grounds the team of not just, hey, we have these things to work on, but also I now have a team of people that I sit with daily, weekly, whatever it is, all together. And there's this packet, 1 page, 10 pages, however long it is, of things that they don't feel comfortable saying in this group. And I think it just screams how powerful that is to me when I hear you talk about that.
The other day, there was a team I was working with, and they had the trust issue as part of their topic. We say we trust each other, but do we really? Question mark. That was one of the comments in the perception consolidations. And sometimes I'll give those statements back to the people and say, how do you feel about this? What would you want to do to increase the level of trust between the members of the team? And they came up with things like, first of all, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. If something happens that might trigger me, go to that person and work it out with them, which they hadn't been doing. It sounds really simple. Or be more transparent, or we put our problems on the table so everybody can see the problems of another, which is vulnerability and authenticity. And so you can build a set of what I call best practices or standards of excellence around that so people can really move that ahead in a very fast way.
Dan, this has been very eye-opening. I really appreciate everything that you brought here, talking about the team leadership mentality versus the individual. Do you have any last-minute thoughts for the group before we go?
Well, I think what I would say is in my work, and there's a couple dozen people in the world that do the kind of work that I do at the level that I do. And I'm not coming in because a team is broken. Every team is doing some things very well. And helping teams find their blind spots or those topics are really what it's about. And I believe that every leadership team deserves to play at their best. And I think that leadership teams deserve to create their own breakthroughs. So it isn't like me coming in with a legion of consultants. It's a facilitative approach to helping them get the things on the table that help move their team and their business forward. And so what I would say, and the reason it's successful is because it's both about the team issues, but they're always really hot business issues on the workshop as well. Because if you just try to do team stuff at this level and don't have any business topics, these guys get bored really quickly.
Right.
And so it's really important. Team leadership, team development is about excelling the team's development, but also about improving the business results. And it's a joy to work with the people I work with, and to have this conversation with you has been fantastic.
I've definitely appreciated the conversation. It's given me a lot to think about and to evaluate even within the leadership team that I'm a part of. So I really appreciate it. And just a reminder for all the listeners, Executive Ownershift, the book that Dan wrote. So please go check that out. It covers a lot more of what we've discussed today. We've really probably only touched the tip of the iceberg with everything we've discussed. But thank you again, Dan. If anybody has any questions for Dan or wants more information, I'll have his information in the about portion of the YouTube video. And if you have any questions for him, I can pass that along. You can email me at leadinquarters@gmail.com. Of course, you can check out our Apple Podcast and Spotify and Amazon podcast, which is our audio version of the Leadership in Quarters podcast. And then you can subscribe to the YouTube page at Lead in Quarters to see this video and all other ones that we end up posting. But Dan Norenberg, thank you for everything that you brought here and all of the information that you've shared with myself and the audience. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning about this.
Thank you, Josh. Pleasure was mine. Keep doing what you're doing. Continue as you are. It's inspiring what you're doing and running a family and a full-time job and also this great podcast. So I just love it. Your episodes give me a lot as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.